Welcome back. A historic deal this week in the state legislature, and one that delivers a massive win to both parties. That's not a headline we're used to in Wisconsin. Top Republicans, Speaker Robin Vos and Senate Leader Devin LeMahieu, negotiated long into the night on Wednesday to reach a deal on shared revenue with Governor Tony Evers. They announced that Thursday afternoon, and that means billions of new dollars pumped into local cities. That's a complaint years in the making as Milwaukee teeters on the brink of bankruptcy. Political reporter Will Kenneally has been at the Capitol a lot of the week. Did you get any sleep? You've been tracking these developments. What was the week like?
Yes, I am bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. We are having a great time. So yeah, what we're seeing essentially kind of throughout the week was earlier in the week on Monday, the governor and the Republican leaders met. We don't know obviously what went down in that meeting, but from what we heard, the governor said it was relatively positive, which is good, I think, just as a person who kind of likes the wheels of government turning forward. Anytime that we can get both sides of the aisle together moving forward and good conversation, that's always generally good.
But, and one thing, I think the important curtain backdrop to this is that the last week, was it not? It was kind of all up where everyone was saying we're done negotiating? Exactly.
So we've seen a significant amount of Republican infighting, which we haven't seen too much of the current staffing here with Speaker Vos and Leader Devin LeMahieu. Essentially, the two couldn't get together at the same table, and Vos had, when the Assembly was done with the shared revenue plan, Vos said, you know what, kind of wiping our hands, we're done with this. Since then, he has come back to the table with some concessions and some negotiating between the governor and the Senate leader as well.
I want to get into some of those concessions, compromises in a minute, but I actually want to pull back big picture real quick. We keep saying the word shared revenue. We keep talking about this funding plan, but for viewers who may not be quite as in the weeds as we are, can you back up and just give me a picture of why this is so important and why we've been talking about this so much on the show?
Yes. So essentially, this is the state aid that goes to cities, counties, towns, and villages. Really crucial funding. We've had essentially a static formula for, I think, more than a decade, since long before I've started reporting here. And this would be a really needed kind of update for that funding formula. We've heard from mayors essentially, just budget-wise, they've had to make really hard decisions in the last couple of years, obviously with the pandemic. But one mayor for Watertown, for example, has to make the decision of, okay, every other street light we have to turn off just because we are in such budgetary constraints. So this is a lot of money that can go to help those municipalities even literally just keep the lights on.
So let's get into the sticking points. What's been the big hang-ups? What have been the compromises we saw this week?
So it's not going to be as specific for our Madison viewers, but the big stick-up so far has been Milwaukee. It's been kind of a big pariah for Republicans, obviously, as they've been working through this budget cycle and the shared revenue cycle. So essentially what they want to do is lower the amount that Milwaukee gets kind of off the top, but allow them to raise a local sales tax. That would be for the city and the county to stem off some of the issues that they have with their pension running essentially a little bit of a deficit. Milwaukee currently right now, without this aid, which it looks like they will get, would face what's called insolvency, essentially the city's version of bankruptcy. So the holdup was, how do we implement the sales tax? Do we want that to go to referendum, have the voters be able to decide whether to raise the sales tax or not, or can that be handled at the city council and county board level? Vos, Assembly Speaker Robin Vos, when it passed the Assembly, this bill passed the Assembly first and foremost. When it passed the Assembly, Vos wanted it to go to referendum. Local leaders in Milwaukee were very concerned about whether it would actually be able to pass referendum. It would be a little bit easier if you have these kind of local governing boards make those decisions. The problem for the rest of us here in Madison, kind of south central Wisconsin here, is that this Milwaukee issue is holding up the funding for everybody. All of the towns and municipalities in the state were kind of hinging on what Republican and the Democratic governor wanted to do with this Milwaukee issue.
That's fascinating developments, and I think Milwaukee has often been the sticking point for funding these types of decisions historically. I want to also touch on, I was reading through these different statements yesterday as they came in. The governor drops his statement, Vos, LeMahieu dropped their statements, and they're both emphasizing very different things, right? Vos, LeMahieu, hey, we got money for police, Evers, hey, we got money for education. Kind of give me the straight down the line interpretation. What's the middle ground of what everyone actually got?
Yes. So I like the joke of you always want a one-handed economist, right? So they don't say, well, on one hand and then on the other hand, right? So I think the key thing to note here is that we haven't seen anything on paper yet. Kind of the behind-the-scenes process is this is currently sitting in a Senate committee right now. It'll go to the Senate floor at some point. We're thinking maybe within the next couple of weeks. And what they'll do is they'll pass a big amendment to whatever hits the Senate floor. So we're kind of waiting on that paper to see what the details are. So right now we're looking at essentially 2 press conferences, 2 statements from the Democratic side and the Republican side.
But no paper or bills to back it up and actually look at the numbers.
Exactly.
Got it.
So it's a lot of rhetoric, but that rhetoric is really important. So the governor is obviously going to tout what he's been kind of the chief Democratic negotiator. He's going to tout some of what he brought to the table. So that's obviously the former DPI secretary. That's a lot of education for him. So top line numbers, it's going to be an extra $1 billion in education to help make sure that the state can provide 2/3 funding for these local school districts. We saw a bill come out recently this past week, another $50 million for reading and literacy in Wisconsin, another $30 million for mental health efforts in Wisconsin, especially in schools, which has been a big push by the governor. On the Republican side, we've seen a lot of conservative wins. Assembly Speaker Voss was talking a lot about those. For him, he says that will be, and again, we don't know the details of this, but preventing funding going for diversity, equity, and inclusion hires around the state. And we also saw what I would have thought would have been some of the poison pills that Democrats were alluding to earlier in this process. A lot of law enforcement funding for Milwaukee. So specifically, Milwaukee schools have to put 25 school resource officers, police officers in schools, into Milwaukee public schools.
Which they don't have currently right now. Okay. We've got to wrap up. We got like 30 seconds left. I do want to touch very quickly. We're a Dane County TV station. Did we get anything out of the deal? Very quickly.
Dane County sits very well.
Okay.
So we're looking at previous numbers. Top line, they want to increase state aid to municipalities by 15%. They announced that will be up to 20% this week. Again, we don't have numbers, but if we look at that 15%, some earlier numbers, Dane County will see a 256% increase. That is fascinating. Madison, for example, will have a 58% increase on state aid. Other places like Rock County will receive a 39% increase.
Amazing. Have you been geeking out a little bit this week?
So much, and I'm so excited when this actually hits the floor. It'll be a fun time.
Viewers, you want the political reporter who's going to be geeking out over the numbers for you. All right, thank you so much for coming on. We will be right back.